Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. I have had a hard couple of months, and I want to share a little bit of kind of behind the scenes and also just sort of a map for how do we get ourselves restored and back to baseline. So we all go through times that are really tough. There's some kind of an event, an illness in the family or a loss of a job or something that really sets us back. I've known women who had miscarriages when they desperately wanted a child, and that was intense and heavy. And so we can go through these experiences of grief, and sometimes it's an acute momentary grief where there's a single event, and sometimes grief is really prolonged and we're in a complicated situation for a while. And the other thing that I think can really happen that's harder to pin down is when there are a lot of little things that are adding to your emotional stack or undermining your emotional equilibrium. And you just have more of those closer together that kind of add up. So maybe you're dealing with a physical condition that's painful and uncomfortable, and then you have a car repair on top of that, and then you have a coworker who, bites your head off about something really minor because of whatever they're going through. And it starts to kind of result in this unsettled feeling. And I know for some people that is the baseline. And if that is kind of like you always feel unsettled or a little bit unsafe in the world, or you're not solid in being here, that's kind of its own thing to triage. For me, it's very much a case of normally I have a relatively good emotional equilibrium. I have a lot of self-trust. I feel pretty safe in the world. And then when I had the events of the last couple of months, it just sort of undermined it. And when I would start to get to recovery, there would be something else that then had to be dealt with and wrangled. So I'll tell you a little bit about the story of all that has gone down, or at least some of it. And then I'll talk more about like what my protocols are for being able to shift myself back. And I'll be honest, I'm still in the midst of that journey of getting back to where I would feel really at baseline, really where I generally reside, in terms of well-being and feeling good in the world. So the major source of stress over the last couple of years has been the result of having made a really bad choice when I rented my condo the last time. So I rent the house that I live in out in the hills of San Diego, which I love, but I have a condo that I bought a number of years ago when I was just starting my practice. I picked something that I knew I could afford and still be able to quit my engineering job and transfer into my healing practice. And at the time, I needed to be able to commute to my engineering job. Now that I'm doing this full time and have been for a long time, there's no commute, so I can live a little further out and have an environment that's more conducive. So it's been a great choice for having a home environment that really suits me and really supports me. It's been a tough choice in terms of taxes, and it's been kind of a complicated choice because my passion for livelihood has definitely not been being a landlord. And up until this last tenant, everything worked out okay enough. Sometimes things were a little alarming, but overall I managed to have relationships that worked out well with the people that I rented to. And with this last gal, there were a lot of kind of warning flags. One of the people I know on Facebook asked me because I'd been talking about what a hard, complicated journey I'd had, and she was thinking like, wow, if I get a roommate, I'm really scared. What if I get a bad apple? Katie, you're really super intuitive. Did you miss the warning signs? Or, how can I feel safe to trust somebody to explore a roommate situation? And I had a number of, suggestions for her about agreeing to a trial period and how to screen. But the answer was I did see warning flags at the beginning, and I overrode them, first of all, just sort of out of a misguided over niceness and desire not to have conflicts. So she interviewed really well over the phone. Her references checked out. Her credit was good enough. The background check came out clean. And then I met with her, and she was really erratic, really all over the place, really big energy. And at that moment I was like, ooh, I don't like this. But I'd already agreed to meet her to sign the lease and get the payment. And I just didn't feel like I was willing to say, you know what, this isn't feeling like the right thing, 2020 hindsight. And then as we went along, it was really difficult. She kept kind of playing these manipulative games where she would try to do an end run around me with my handy person, and she would promise to get the electric in her name and 3 rounds of calling to just verify, because I'm that dot the I's, cross the T's person, that yes, she did indeed turn over the electrical into her own name and out of my name when she said she would, and finding that no, indeed, that had not happened, and there'd been no communication. There was just a whole series of things consistently being, up to a week late with the rent. And eventually I had a really candid conversation with her about, we really need to get to more success, or this isn't going to work out. And I had her on a month-to-month lease. But out of that kind of niceness of I don't want to take something away that she really wants. I don't want to disrupt her life by terminating her lease, a little bit of codependence and caretaking and overgiving. And I'll be really honest, laziness on my part. I hate going over and showing the condo and going through the whole process and screening people and having it potentially be empty. There's just a lot of stress that went with that. The obvious solution was a property manager, but at that time I was coming out in the red every month with the condo. Now, long term, it was being paid off. It was a good investment, but I really felt a lot of tension around money, especially at the time that I made that choice, which meant I didn't have a property manager and meant that I decided to live with this. And then COVID happened, and there was all this crazy legislation that prevented being able to get rid of this person. And she started breaking the lease in really significant ways. She got a pet in a no-pet apartment. She moved someone else in. She changed the locks. She denied entry when there was a plumbing emergency. And I went through I hired a lawyer. I went through everything and found that I really didn't have much recourse. And eventually, California kept extending all of the protections, which I know was really helpful for certain people who were economically impacted by COVID. But for this person, she ran out all of her COVID benefits, then kept reapplying to keep the protections on a technicality after she, used up all the money that had been allocated to her, the 18 months of having her rent paid. And then things got really, really hard because I gained the legal right to evict her eventually, but the courts took a much longer path in San Diego for people who'd applied for aid. There was different paperwork, and it just sat and sat and sat in the courts. And so it took over 10 months before I was finally to the point that she was locked out, which was hard to survive financially. There was all this, okay, any day now it'll go through, everything's filed, we're on to the next step, and then more waiting, bad information from the lawyers about how things would move. It was just a really long, difficult, painful process. And I had this wonderful imagining that the minute she was locked out and I was done with her and it was complete and I had been impeccable in terms of what she was entitled to, even as a non-paying tenant, I would just have this massive amount of relief. And for sure, it was a relief when that happened. But what I've noticed over the following weeks and months was that so much time of holding tension and writing to representatives and trying to find someone who could help me, or what programs were in place, or what was going to happen, just the stress of carrying this in my emotional load and emotional stack over such a long period of time has taken some recovery time. And so there's been waves of sadness and moments of anger and a lot of complexity and some complicated stuff after she was locked out. So once I got the condo back, I found out that in the time since she stopped paying rent, she had accumulated quite a lot of physical belongings. So there was a ton of furniture and clothes and purses. And I also found out that there was a lot of kind of sketchy stuff. So the drugs I expected, because I was under no illusions that this person was an addict. So the drug paraphernalia and the actual drugs, not surprising. But what was kind of a surprise was that there were other people's passports and social security cards and all of these fake checks that were being printed in other people's names. She had like 4 different printers and birth certificates laying on the printer in someone else's name. So there was all this evidence. I don't know what exactly the scheme was or what was happening, but there was all this evidence of potentially other people really being hurt by her activities. The upshot was that at a time that I was hoping to exhale in relief and move toward being done with the condo, there was a lot of complexity of figuring out how to get rid of her stuff after the waiting period, how to move it out of the way so we could start repairs because, the place was filthy and the sheriff was saying, hey, make sure you wear a mask when you handle all of this because of, the fentanyl risks and, just a really complicated situation to get all the things out of the way and to begin work and to reckon with how to get all the potential identity theft stuff or fraud stuff, whatever all those papers were, to the proper authorities. That proved complicated. And so going through all of this mental understanding the situation, the former tenant sent some really unpleasant, rather irrational emails about, various things. So I really noticed how much my blood pressure spiked, how reactive I was to seeing her name pop up. I had eventually hired a property manager because I just wasn't able to deal with her. And so I hadn't had any interaction. And so there was just a lot going on. I found somebody to help box up her stuff. He did a great job. He was like, okay, I can totally handle the painting. And then he came back with a bid that was about a $1,400 job, and he tried to bid $7,400 for it. And it was just this like, oh wow, here's this person who's just spent all this time cleaning up the mess that was made by someone, and his response was to try to play on the relationship that had been developed in those few days of helping out in this really extreme way, which not personal, but for me it landed really personally. I didn't feel resilient for, oh wow, that's an interesting strategy. So I eventually found someone who, was like, yeah, $1,400. I'll do everything he was going to charge you $7,400 for and more. We'll get this taken care of. But that's been a complicated process where, there's a saying in engineering where you can have it done right, you can have it done fast, you can have it done cheap. Pick any two. And I was trying for all 3, and I'm got kind of moderate results in all areas. It's taken a lot longer than it should have taken, but it does seem to be moving forward. But the upshot was just all of these complicated moments, decisions to make, going back and forth with the property manager who was really busy. He had people, they might not be available, they might cost more. Just a lot of complexity and layers and things to think through. And meanwhile, I was, maintaining, my own work and my own practice and my own grocery store runs and all of those kind of things. So the upshot was just feeling really reactive and a little bit unsafe. And one of the things that I believe to be true is that safety is an inside job once you've dealt with the external factors. So if you're living in a, high crime neighborhood, might be a really good idea to get really strategic and resourceful. I know that everybody's mileage varies, so it's way easier said than done, but there may be some troubleshooting on a really practical level. If you're with a partner who has a tendency to be violent, that's, by definition unstable. So I just want to preface this: safety is an inside job in once you're in secure enough circumstances. So we're not talking about like, oh, my partner drinks and then he puts his fist through the wall, but safety is an inside job. Katie said so. I should just work on my mindset. That's not the message. But for many of the people I work with, everything is really solid at the level of circumstances. If you look at the statistics, humans are living in just the safest time in all of recorded history. And we can even look at the hunter-gatherer bones and see that we're so much more free from violence. And I admit we have a long way to go, and the news stories cover the exceptions rather than the rules. So our brains are just hard. They're really good at dramatic circumstances and stories rather than statistics. So they're just kind of hardwired to be really fearful. And unlike hunter-gatherer people or agricultural people with little farms, sustenance farming, we have access to information about so many different threats or disruptions because we can understand what's happening to people all over the world. So there was a meme that I really got a kick out of because I was watching all that, TV in the 80s, and it was something about, wow, quicksand has just not turned out to be nearly as much of a problem in my adult life as I anticipated as a child. And, there were all the Westerns with the dramatic moment where someone's in quicksand and sinking and they're desperately trying to get them a rope, and, just that really dramatic tension. Quicksand's a very effective storytelling device for creating a certain kind of scenario and experience. But most of us, some people live in places where there's quicksand and they do need to have the learnable skill of how not to get into quicksand. But for most of us, not such a big deal. And yet our brains are very much about, absorbing all of these kind of threats. And so we have these really active imaginations, and they're bolstered by terrible stories that we hear. And so there's just this really unsettled nature where when we have chemistry, when we have activation of the fight or flight system, the brain starts running through scenarios of what would be a danger proportional to what we're feeling, and then strategizing, okay, how would I deal with it? How would I deal if this terrible thing happened or that terrible thing happened? And it's just a really tough place to be when your chemistry's just gotten away from you, when you're tired, when there's a need to keep functioning. Because for me, I suppose I could have, flung my hands up and, said, I somebody else handle this. But it probably would have cost me a lot more money if I hadn't, stayed in the game with the condo. And it might have cost a good bit more time. And I was already in credit card debt from carrying the condo expenses because I was still paying out of pocket for the various expenses without any revenue for over 10 months. And then there were all of the costs for all the repairs and getting it habitable for another person. And so it was a time where I cut my schedule back some, but, just taking a month off from work and deciding to just throw money at the problem with the condo wasn't an area I was super resourced in. So I know that's true for a lot of us. We're like, okay, it would be in a perfect world really great to rest. And maybe my social time with people I love where I just laugh and play is underrepresented right now. And maybe money is not as resilient as it could be. So I can't just write checks and fling money at the problem. Or maybe we're on a deadline at work and it's like you need to show up even though there's a health crisis in the family or someone's going through something emotional. There's just a lot of times when the optimal thing for ourselves, which, might be to take a vacation. I could see this so clearly. There was a ridiculously affordable cruise up the California coast up to Vancouver. They're repositioning their ships for the Alaska season from the Caribbean up to Alaska. So they're like, yes, we will grab some people, cart them up the coast with ports of call along the way, and then, cover our costs for moving the ships. But was a really affordable offer, and I was like, oh man, I really, even for how affordable this is, I know how quickly, incidental expenses add up. So it wouldn't be the most responsible financial choice. And I just don't have the energy to deal with all the logistics of getting packed and getting to the places I need to be and arranging the cat care and, just all of that. I just don't have the energy. So it's not going to work out. But man, oh man, does it feel like it would be just the best thing ever to be in a cabin by myself, looking at the California coastline or out at the ocean, with somebody else preparing my meals, and just that kind of deep stillness and rest. And so I want to just share some things when you're in that place, because I think we all have times that we're in this kind of place where there's just a lot that we're carrying in our emotional, mental, physical, whatever the stack is, that undermine our resilience, our sense of well-being, and it makes it harder to feel safe in the world. It makes it harder to feel resourced. One of the things that really hit me hard was a badly misaligned client, and I get these so seldom. Like, the vast majority of people I work with are amazing and really cool people, and I can really, see things. And this gal, it just ended up being a hard session. She was somebody who, really had diminished capacity to see her effect on others, and so was in a lot of pain about relationships where she didn't get what she desperately wanted from people, but wasn't available to look at the possibility that they were responding to her. If she had an emotion, automatically somebody else was wrong. Just a lot of this. And after the session, she really wanted to keep processing. I want to keep talking about this. I want to keep talking about this. I'm like, no, you have to book another session. I'm not going to be available over email. And the instructions for the soul retrieval are wait 24 hours. You need to give it some time to settle. This is a major energetic intervention. And I told her that probably 10 times, like 8 times in the session. No, we can't go into this further. I even gifted her with extra time. And then via email, no, you need to settle with this. You need to be with this. And she was having none of it. So when I enforced the boundary, she contested the session via PayPal. And, that happens sometimes. I have a no refunds policy, but it doesn't stop somebody who's really worked themselves into that righteous, I am right and the other person's wrong. And I'll be honest, that's one of the things that really makes me feel unsafe in the world when I contemplate it, is the ability of someone to tell a story about you and project it onto you, and they just can't see you. There's no opportunity to be seen. There's no way to refute it. When someone's really triggered with you, their biochemical rewards for, telling someone they're either a friend or an enemy. And once you're cast in that role, the instinct mind, which is what kicks in when we're under the influence of high emotions, it just doesn't really work with nuance, with being able to see the complicated picture, being able to see how our actions may have impacted the situation. And much as I know this to be true, and I'm really aware of it, it does tend to make me feel a little bit unsafe with people that I don't know really well, that I haven't had the experience that they can be triggered and still not go to the black and white, right, wrong, friend, enemy. Brene Brown talks really beautifully about some of this, like making generous assumptions and embracing the suck when you're really triggered, and don't talk, don't text, don't type when you're in the throes of that kind of intensity. And as someone, like part of what was, just hard about the situation is I could go back to my 20s and see a lot of these behaviors where if I got hurt, I assumed the other person did something wrong, and I might or might not tell them about how wrong and bad they were. And, that was the explicit language being used in this email exchange. And so, and part of it that was hard for me too is I really allow my heart chakra and my solar plexus to operate in their own lanes. And what I mean by that is a lot of times people have this push-pull. They'll collapse boundaries to keep connection. So they'll try to put up with things because they don't want the conflict or the difficulty. Or when it gets to be too much, the pendulum can swing the other way, and then they get really, really intense and all the things that someone's done wrong. If anyone has a monologue of the petty offense file of everything they're upset about for a really long time, that's someone who's been swallowing their truth to keep the connection, and the energy is built up so much that now it's all pouring out. And for me, I'm really committed to the both and of holding a really good sense of clarity about what is and isn't okay with me and where I stand and what I'm available for and what I'm not available for, and having a heart connection. So even when this person was, really, really upset with me, I didn't vilify her. I could see her wounds. I could see where she came by them. I could see the through line. I could see where the ego death of looking at her part in some of her adult behavior was just too much. It was too scary. It was too hard. She wouldn't have been, willing to give up that victim narrative. No, I'm the victim. They wronged me. They harmed me. And I could have compassion for that. I could get how much of her worldview was constructed around that and all the protections that are in place to keep us from going through. I mean, it takes so much ego death to make these changes, and we remain, no matter how much ego death we've had, there's a part of us that is absolutely terrified on a really visceral, primal level of that. And part of it, I think, is just it takes a lot of calories to rework our worldview. So our brains have a lot of protections in place for looking at different perspectives or seeing things just because of humanity's history of insecure access to food and how much energy it takes to create neuroplasticity and other perspectives. I was thinking about this, just related to doing shamanic journey. And a lot of people really long to connect, but then they might not get around to doing a shamanic journey. And part of what you're overcoming to do a shamanic journey is the same kind of aversion to exercise that a lot of us have. People who really need to move their bodies or are in a flow with it might not experience this, but for those of us who are reluctant exercisers who do it because we know it's good for us, we're overcoming the part of our brain that says, well, unless you're chasing dinner or doing something really related to survival, don't go burning through calories. Hunter-gatherer people did not go for morning runs to limber up. If they were running, they were running from something or after something. And there's just a lot of, don't waste your calories. And similarly, we have that in even something like shamanic journey or meditation. Those do amazing things to the brain. It just activates so many parts of the brain in this really potent and cool and advantageous way. But when we're tired and depleted, it can feel like a lot of energy to go in and do that. So if you're somebody who's wondering why, despite your deep longing to connect with your guides, you don't practice certain things that connect you with them, just know, like on a day with heavy shamanic journeying, I literally burn more calories than I do on a day that I don't do that. It's just a really, really useful thing to know. But for me, part of what was hard about this moment when this woman got so triggered with me and then went into the vilifying righteous indignation process was I get really heart connected to people, and that didn't go away because she was having a fit. I was really clear I would never ever work with her again because I'm just not available for that. but it didn't change the fact that, I had a tender place in my heart for her, like I do for the people that I work with. And so I didn't go to the vilifying her, which would have provided some chemistry to offset the sadness and this visceral reminder of the vulnerability of how people can tell really, really crazy stories, and project things onto you and take what, it's such a wacky thing if you've ever experienced someone taking the thing that they are, the thing that they're behaving as, and ranting and raving about someone else being that, who, may have some elements of that, but represents it so much less. So the person who is deeply untruthful, ranting and raving about all the liars out there, for example. So for me, in terms of this, what is the restorative process? I want to share some about this. So one of the things, in no particular order, has been being disciplined about going more yin. I am endlessly inspired by my practice and my work, and there's always a pile of dishes that could use attention. There's so much that normally, under normal circumstances, I would be engaged with. And part of this was being honest that my nervous system was getting a lot of activation with new information emerging day after day about the condo and the path forward. And this is broken, and this is how much windows cost to replace. And, just so much stimulus that I really needed to counterbalance that with as much peaceful yin, quiet time as possible. So even the content that I was watching, I was trying for things that weren't overly activating to my nervous system. Sometimes that can be great if you have a lot of emotion, you don't know how to process sometimes kind of borrowed emotion. I remember I was so emotionally unprepared to deal with my first big breakup. I'd been with the guy for 7 years. It totally needed to end. We waited way too long for a lot of fear-based and other reasons, but I just had a hard time reckoning with living alone for the first time ever, and the breakup and the change. And so I binge watched, I got on old VHS tapes, somebody who taped Buffy the Vampire Slayer all the way through. I bought it on eBay, and I just watched and watched and watched and watched, and lost myself in this very vibrant, imaginative world with a lot of emotionality. And it was just really helpful for getting to the other side. I have more direct ways of reckoning with my emotion, but that just wasn't in my toolbox in my, mid to late 20s. And so that was something that was helpful. But for this, I really was looking at keeping my stimulation less because it would really be helpful, and being really strategic about the people I connected with being very, very high quality, very needs met, people that the more vulnerable parts of me felt really safe with. That was a good choice for this time. And the resting thing is hard. It really does take a lot of discipline. We have a culture that really shames rest and downtime and yin and lack of productivity. And oftentimes we're inspired for way more than we have hours in the day or even energy in the day. Sometimes I run out of energy before I run out of hours. And so through this, I've really been working with, as much restorative as possible, and also just being really mindful of my heightened emotional reactivity. So for this, just knowing that I need to be really careful. I've been kind of on this for a couple of months now with the condo before it went through and everything else, being like, okay, I didn't care for that little bit of boundary pushing there, but it really wasn't a monstrous offense, and I probably shouldn't take that person's head off. I should probably take a few breaths, calm down, and then find a really kind way to, that's clear but kind about what will and won't work for me and where I am and am not available to participate in something. So Brene Brown's, take a pause, take a breath, has been really important. I've been leaning really heavily on my techniques for calming the instincts, just recognizing that a lot of all of this disruption goes to feeling not safe in the world. And I really I felt that way a lot when I was younger. I felt very, very unsafe, and it made me very controlling and type A and reactive. And, there's just a lot of who I get to be now that wasn't available because I was hyper vigilant and on edge on some level. And I did a lot of deep work to clean that up. And I've just needed to go back to some of my practices to calm my nervous system because it's just tending to activate more. And so proactively calming it down as much as possible is really, really important. So I've been working with that a lot. And I've been working with the patience thing of giving myself the grace of this just takes time. And I wish it didn't. I did a really profound journey with the guides, and they were showing me like a wound that ran really deep that is healing and scarring over related to this whole condo experience. And scars aren't a bad thing. I've been changed in terms of worldview and experience and choices, and there's been transformation as a result of what I've gone through. I want to be careful. A lot of times we want to make meaning out of trauma, like, oh, I grew through the trauma, so it was good. And sometimes it's enough to just survive trauma, and putting on the, not only do I have to survive trauma, I have to grow from it, seems like a little bit of an extra. But, if you happen to harvest gifts along the way, that's a lovely thing. But I think that we feel like, especially those of us who have been on a healing path for a long time, or on a path where we have good mindfulness, we have good skills, we have done a lot of inner work, we're not carrying a lot of emotional debt about things that happened in our childhood. There's a health that we feel like we should be able to be better with this than is possible. And one of the really kind things someone said to me, I think I shared this in an earlier podcast, was there's an upper limit on how much you can mindset your way out of really hard stuff. There's been a certain element of, for sure, I could use all my techniques to lessen the focus and lessen the suffering, but I just never figured out a way to have it not be impactful, that this situation was happening, that this person was under functioning, and that I was bound by the law of the land for so long to pay their housing costs out of my pocket while it went on my credit cards and my rent went up. I just, I never got to a place where I could be neutral with that. And yay for people who can work that through, but I don't think that that's the majority of the population. And I think some percentage of the people who claim that are doing some emotional bypassing and maybe not being quite honest about what's brewing in their belly. They may have moved away from some of the other chakras and into chakras who really don't care. Like, there are chakras that aren't interested in this kind of thing, but some of them really, really, really were. So for me, it's just a self-compassion, because I'm so geeky about how to feel better right away and how to have ease and relief and effectiveness and access our magic and all of these kind of things. And there was just this level of circumstance. It wasn't like my life was horrible in other ways, but there was something that was really stuck. And sometimes that's just the case. You can be doing everything right, and there's just something with your body that is really hard to move, and it limits what your body can do, no matter how much amazing mindfulness you have. They're these, interesting complexity and multi-layered human experience. And so one of the things I just really want to offer, not only for ourselves, I think it's really important to treat ourselves with compassion when going through something hard just has more recovery time than we would wish. But also if someone else is going through something hard. And this can be complicated because if we have a little bit of that codependency going on and caretaking, we can want them to feel differently so we'll feel okay and we won't feel like we need to fuss over them. And so that's a really good thing to look internally. If we're giving someone messages, you may just need to be like, wow, I have infinite compassion and I've given all I can for right now. And that's a completely valid place to stand with another person. But just having that compassion, if you're not in the thick of it, for remembering times when you were, and having compassion that someone might not be able to mindset their way out. I curate my Facebook friend group for people who get to see my friends only posts, for removing people who just can't help. Like, even if I say, like, I'm not looking for advice, I'm just sharing an experience, there's nothing to fix. Empathy and compassion would be great, but here's what's going on. Here's what's really happening for me. And there'll be that person who gives me, like meme-based advice on how I could just shift my mindset and feel better. I bopped a guy I actually really like him. I think he has amazing gifts and a lot to share, but I was talking about going through toward the end before the lockout happened and saying, I have a ton of support and I feel really isolated in this. And he couldn't resist sending me a private message saying, well, when we feel connected to spirit, we know that isolation is an illusion and we don't feel isolated, even if this is hard. And I was like, no, actually, at the level of fact, I feel incredibly connected to my guides, and I still feel isolated in this. I still feel lonely and alone and on my own, even knowing at the level of fact, I'm very connected to my guides and I'm connected to amazing friends. Like, both are true. And it's great that your truth is different, but this one's mine. So one of the things you may need to do in these kind of journeys is kind of fend off people who really have good intent, really want you to experience relief, but their emotional intelligence and their skill set for supporting someone going through something that's deep and complicated and maybe outside of their experience might get in the way of them having really, really relevant support. And somebody who, is bolstering voices in your head that might tell you, oh, you should just be over this, that can be really hard. Another piece, I know this is getting really long, I can't seem to talk short, but another piece was just really recognizing that not feeling safe and putting my mind to work on looking at questioning that feeling of not safety. And what I realized was I was not enjoying the amount of emotion that I was feeling and the depth of it, and that I was afraid that there would be more disruptions that would make me feel things I didn't want to feel. And I think there is, on some level, a primal fear of how much humans can tell a story and really hurt other people with their story. I'm super geeky about racism in the United States. There was a thing as a teenager. I was grabbing books that were, writing about it from the library in the next town over and reading them in my spare time. I was just so in the like, I don't get this. I don't agree with it. What's happening? And so I really understand the depth of the written narrative that went into making up the story that this thing was okay, and rationalizing and justifying it. And you can look at something like the Holocaust, and there are these places where people tell these stories that allow them to treat other people really badly. And I think it's important for us to balance that with looking at the bigger statistical picture, the bigger picture of how much people help. The tornado comes through and there are all these programs to help people get back on their feet. I grew up in a really small town, and there was a lot of neighbors helping each other out. Oh, you're in the hospital, we'll go milk your goats. There was this kind of way that humans help each other and show up for each other, and even in struggle can find ways to be really, really kind and really helpful. And so in this very stimulating time in my life, I had a story of, some people who, weren't in integrity and were either trying or at the level of fact did make my journey harder, and told stories to themselves on whatever level that was okay. And at the same time, I just had people that, were wanting to give to their detriment. And I'm like, no, you have to rest. You've given enough. You've given more than is sustainable. Let other people help me. I'm okay. I'm just whiny. I swear I would tell you if I wasn't okay, but this is just me being whiny. I am in a position to recover from this financially. I'm just not best pleased that having worked so hard to get out of credit card debt, there's money on credit cards. But that's not the same as, not being okay. This will be in the black once all of this resolves. So there's this process of going in and recognizing that fear of humans that project, and then really looking at all the people that see me and that know me and are in my corner and are generous and kind to other people and to me and all of that. So I did some real, not making up stories, not magical thinking, but really looking at, I am connected to my guides. I am supported. Look at all the things that have worked out for me. Look at the people who are in my corner. Look at the help that I have. Look at the people who do see me. I am rather ruthless in sorting out people who project onto me, whether they're clients, whether they're friends, whether they're an acquaintance, whether it's a service person. If they are not seeing me and they have a lot of projection, I know I can't succeed with that. So I'm pretty good at sorting it. So I know there's a lot here. I wish I had, it's kind of like the stack of things, like everything that's made the last couple of months really tough. It isn't like a single thing. If it had just been the eviction and it wasn't all these other factors, it would have been a lot easier to, just have the healing journey be an upward spiral. But there were all these other agitations and factors and just flavors of more stimulation than I care for. I'm pretty sensitive, so a lot of stuff going on really takes a toll on me. And so when I'm sharing the path through, and I don't feel like I'm completely on the other side, but I feel like I'm well on the way, it's just recognizing that there are just a lot of different pieces that factor in and that work with this and that come together in this journey, just like there were a lot of individual hits that I took during this time, and it's the nature of life. The world can be spiky and bumpy, and people can be messy and weird and noble and amazing and everything in between. And so I wish I had this one technique will get you out if you've gotten really in a tough place. But I just kind of wanted to be transparent and also share that I'm profoundly connected to spirit, and I've never for a moment felt not loved, supported, held, connected to my guides. There's been no moment when that didn't happen. It's just that I'm in a body and they're not, and there's a lot of complicated stuff that we reckon with as humans. And so having wise guidance both internally and in my spirit guides and in the humans in my life is super helpful. And each and every one of us is still at ground zero doing our lives with everything that's there. So I wish amazing connection to spirit would inoculate us against the complexity of being human that shows up some of the time. But I find that it's a resource, but it's only one of a number of different resources. So I hope that there's something in here that supports you, whether it's giving yourself compassion in your own journey or just having more wisdom and compassion to sort somebody who's, just kind of got a lot on their plate right now and isn't flowing as well as they might under other circumstances. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.